Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next session, which is focusing on floating wind and its potential in Australia. I'm Amisha Patel, Director of Public Affairs, Global Offshore at the Global Wind Energy Council. We're going to start this session with a presentation from one of our panelists, and then we'll move into a moderated panel discussion with two additional panelists. It'd be really great if we could have audience participation here. So we'll be starting with a few questions and then we'll turn to the audience to place questions to our panelists as well. First up, I'd like to welcome David Carrascosa, Director of Operations from SciTech, to deliver his presentation, A Path Towards Commercialisation of Floating Wind in Australia. Welcome, David.
Okay, hello everyone. No, it's right after the coffee break, so maybe we feel a bit sleepy. So let's try to go into what we think it's an interesting topic, right? Good. So yeah, my name is David Carrascosa, and I'm here representing two organizations, not only one. So first, I'm going to briefly speak about my main focus, which is SciTech, so representing SciTech Offshore Technologies. Okay. But then I will also get into the blue economy CRC, which I think it's an interesting endeavor here in Australia. So first, again, SciTech Offshore is a company that it's spin-off from a bigger group, an engineering group in Spain. And through the spin-off, we focus on the development of floating offshore wind with a focus on the technology, where we've been developing a patent for the last 10 years. So, to be honest, I think that the best way to describe what we do is through our latest project, and that latest project is the DemoSat project. So it's really the flagship project of SciTech Offshore, where we've reached real scale demonstration. This is a project happening in the Basque region, north of Spain, where we have partnered with RWE first and Kansai Electric Power Corporation after. Both of them have become partners in the project and co-investors. This is a project where we are using a 2 megawatt wind turbine generator. Our floater dimensions for this size of turbine is 30 by 64 meters, and we are locating the platform 2 miles off the coast of the Basque region in Baimep, which is a test site which is founded by the both regional and national government in Spain. Water depth is 85 meters, and we are using a hybrid system for mooring. I think something which is very relevant to our technology and the way we see floating offshore wind developing is the use of concrete as main construction material. Concrete means local content, and that's one of the key elements that we've demonstrated within this project, as more than 75% of the budget for construction has been awarded to companies headquartered 25 kilometers around the port of Bilbao. But well, better to, let's say, a slide is actually a video, and that's what we have here. It's a video summarizing the last couple of years in the project. Good. So that's in a nutshell what we do at SciTech Offshore. But today and this session is about Australia and floating wind potential in the region. So to speak about that, now I will change my hat and I will speak as a member of the Blue Economy CRC. And that's actually a very interesting organization that's been pulled together under the umbrella of the CRC, so the Cooperative Research Centers program by the Commonwealth. And this specific CRC is all about blue economy. So the development of, let's say, a circular economy around fisheries, around agriculture, and then being obviously boosted by marine renewable energy, same wave, tidal, and obviously floating offshore wind. Within the blue economy CRC, and back in 2021, there's one of the major deliverables so far has been let's say, the report that you can see here. Once you download the presentation, if you want, you can click on the link and go directly to the report. But I'm just going to briefly take some of the main outcomes, I think, from this report we've put together in the organization. So first is the wind resource in the region. And yeah, when I see this map and I compare with the typical wind resource maps in Europe, I get a bit confused because I see a lot of green, and when I see green in Europe, it's okay, we are in the area of low wind speed. Well, light green here is actually between 8 and 9 meters per second in terms of average wind speed. And then if you look into the right, so you've got the IEC wind class, so a bit more representative. So basically, what we end up having, and one of the key exercises we did within this study was actually doing some kind of exercise on looking into the potential capacity factors using a 15 megawatt turbine, basically the NREL model, which is an open source model, and we got actually a gross part of the potential area in Australia having capacity factors between 50% and up to 70%. So massive for let's say the offshore wind. Also, the accessible resource we see is in the order of 2,000 gigawatts. And how have we looked into what's accessible resource? Well, the report did also a very interesting exercise, which is looking at areas which are located within, let's say, shore and up to, let's say, up to 1,000 meters in terms of depth, and then sites which are located within an area of at least 100 kilometers from electricity substations and transmission lines. And that's how we gather this information, this very valuable information about the potential of Australia and then the potential areas. I think that it's a very interesting report also because it's actually one of the bases that the government has been using to then afterwards look into the areas that are being confirmed throughout this conference. We can see also that if we look into the different areas and the different regions, there's obviously difference between the states and well, while New South Wales has mainly potential in floating wind region, which is the grey region, we see that, well, Queensland, as we may know, shallow near, or let's say shallow conditions are very interesting. So I've got just one slide and looking into the also the potential of floating wind of becoming a base case, and this is kind of an exercise we've been doing. We're combining different potential generations we have the scheme of what percentage of the time during the day would offshore wind or solar or onshore wind be like the leading let's say stakeholder in the energy mix, and it's interesting to see how that whole picture is for every of the states, and then obviously as a last slide, and probably then jumping into the discussion, is the opportunity for jobs, synergies with the oil and gas field, and why not synergies also with the civil construction field, as we can bring both steel but also concrete into the water. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, David, and hold that thought on job creation, because we'll come to that later on in the panel. I'd now like to welcome our other panelists to join us. Nam Kwak, Business Development Manager from Skyborn Renewables Australia, welcome. And Rajni Sharma, Director of Project Management from Equinor. Welcome to you both.
Thanks,
So, an abundance of experience in the floating sector on this panel. Let's start with talking about the potential of floating wind in Australia, following on from David's presentation. Rajneesh, what developments are you seeing in the sector from your perspective? And can you introduce yourself and your company as well?
I can start with introducing myself first, Amisha, thanks. My name is Rajni Sharma, and I'm in Equinor, which is a major offshore wind and also a broad energy company. We have ambition to become a global offshore wind major, and we have assets in operation in Europe, and we are also pipelines 6-7 gigawatt in development from US, Europe, including Baltic, and also in APAC. So, personally, I'm currently located in Oslo, but I will relocate to South Korea on Friday, actually. So this is just a pit stop before heading to Korea tomorrow. So I will support the project management and project development in the APAC region, including Australia. I would also like to say that it has been exciting stay here in Australia so far. This is my first trip to Melbourne and Sydney and Australia. And it has been exciting to discuss offshore wind, floating offshore wind in Australia together with our partner, OceanX, who has a strong presence in New South Wales. That's correct. And they have been preparing the ground for offshore wind for some years. We are working with 3 projects in New South Wales, and we also have teamed up with NextFair for projects in Tasmania. When it comes to potential in Australia, I think, as you pointed to, David, it's a huge potential. There's very, very good wind conditions. If you look outside the Northern Sea, who maybe has the best wind conditions, there is very good wind conditions here. Perfect for floating offshore wind. So from southwest to southeast and east. So Australia can be emerging markets when it comes to floating wind. But need some, we will come back to that, and it has been discussed for a couple of days now. You need a clear ambition with clear policies.
Thank you, Rajneesh. Nam, can I turn to you?
Sure, thanks, Amisha, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nam Kwak from Skyborn Renewables. Skyborn is a global IPP when it comes to offshore wind. That's our pure play platform. We focused on offshore wind from the development stages all the way through to arranging finance, construction, and then long-term asset management and O&M. 20-year pedigree and history in focused in offshore wind, and recently, with new parents, global infrastructure partners have rebranded from WPD Offshore to Skyborne Renewables. That's a bit about us, and we've got our strong presence in APAC, with offices in Japan, Taiwan, and also through Australia. And coming to the point about Australia, it's hard not to get excited about the opportunity in Australia, but I think it needs to be very much in a measured way. So it's not an excitement of hype, but it's an excitement of consideration of the opportunity and how do we capitalise on that opportunity for the agenda of decarbonisation with offshore wind. Specifically, I'd say the state of New South Wales presents the key opportunity for floating offshore wind in Australia, primarily because of its environmental conditions. So the continental shelf actually drops off very quick. So you're in very deep water very quick. But look, there's deep water everywhere, so why is that an opportunity? I think when you look at the state of New South Wales and think about what it has to go through with regard to energy transition, we have large coal-fired generation, Bayswater, Eraring, Vales Point. There's 7 gig right there that will be retiring in the next decade. And that needs to be initially replaced with something. So floating offshore wind presents a fantastic opportunity to fill that hole at the very minimum.
Thank you very much. So I think what we're hearing is that the opportunity is here. The regulatory climate is heading in the right direction as well. What about speed? We keep on talking about acceleration, time is of the essence, Europe is progressing. How long is it going to take to deliver in Australia? David, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question, and we've seen and we've heard a lot about supply chain readiness, right? And there, I think floating offshore wind has an opportunity to rely upon the, let's say, the already established supply chain in the oil and gas field. It has also this possibility to balance the opportunity of, let's say, mature technologies into the steel environment, but also into the concrete environment. So that means we don't need, let's say, the full force into the naval or shipyard construction, but we can also rely upon let's say, the civil construction, supply chain, and big contractors. And that's something that Australia has, and they are very, very strong on it. So I think we can see there an opportunity where even at depths where maybe in Europe you would consider a fixed bottom, maybe there's a range, a gray range there where floating wind can play a role.
Thank you, David. Rajneesh, you wanted to come in?
Just to add some comments to speed. The good thing with Australia is that there are mature markets already in Europe, as an example, so you can take a lot of lessons learned and learnings from the mature markets. You don't have to, as it has been pointed out many times, you don't have to start from zero, from scratch. And when it comes to floating wind, the technology is there already. So we have been having assets in operation since 2009 with Hywind Demo, Hywind Scotland. It was announced last week, Hywind Tampen, which was in operation and officially open, which I have been deeply involved in during commissioning, construction, and the development. So the technology is there. And to kind of, I think, to accelerate, you need to find a balance between, sense of urgency and long-term perspective. Because you need some sense of urgency when it comes to the bottlenecks like supply chain, infrastructure, grid transmission, which has been discussed, and have a long-term perspective, as I said in the beginning, have a clear ambition, and then have clear also policies to support that ambition.
Thank you, Rajneesh. So just picking up on one of your points there, you said, there's a lot of progress regionally. How can Australia benefit from this? I mean, the core part of the conference has been regional collaboration. We have delegations here. What benefits can this bring? How can Australia maximise this?
You mean from all the regions, all the markets?
Working together, coming together.
No, it is, as I said, dialogue, collaboration, try to understand what has been working good in other markets, what has not been working good. When I was in a conference in Copenhagen, there was 3-4 things which was repeated. There was supply chain constraint, it was capacity, it was profitability, and it was permitting. And again, also here, the same things has been discussed. Permitting can delay projects, can be showstopper. So I know that a lot of lawmakers in Europe pledged to accelerate, to simplify the permitting system. So I think learning from those markets and implementing more efficient way of developing projects and the permitting process can help Australia to accelerate.
Thank you. Nam, I'll come to you next, and then I'll come to you, David.
Sure. I think collaboration is a word that we often hear bantied around at some of these conferences, and it's a key theme. And collaboration doesn't just extend to developers collaborating or supply chain collaborating, but also governments collaborating. I'm really glass half full and impressed by the way, particularly the Victorian government has embraced that opportunity of collaboration in the local APAC jurisdiction. And I think we've only scratched the surface of that opportunity. We're in such a industrial, talent and resource-rich region. There's really a great opportunity to capitalise on that. But also for ourselves, Australia as a nation, to play to our strengths, but also the strengths of our neighbours. Thank you. David?
Yeah, and I think that on an APAC perspective, a certain alignment between the different countries would help a lot. Let's say key players in the supply chain taking decisions, right? If I'm I don't know, for example, a steel chain producer, and I like thinking on how to establish my my production in APAC, if I can have some certainties about, well, what's the amount of kilometers and kilometers I will be procuring, not only in Australia but in Japan or in South Korea, to say some, not to exclude anyone, that would be very, very interesting. So seeing all these ambitions coming into regulations and into let's say plans that come into law, which I think Australia is doing good in that relation. So I think that would help, like some certain alignment between countries. Yeah.
And just staying with that for a moment as well, you all have extensive experience in Europe. Any immediate lessons that you think Australia can take advantage from across the border? And are there existing programs to promote floating development in Australia? Are you getting a sense of that, and do they go far enough? So we've 2 questions. David, I'll stay with you.
Yes, on the experience and lessons learned, I think Equinor will be very much into an experience of years and years of operations. From let's say a perspective of stakeholder engagement, we feel like a development of floating wind in phases can be interesting. And when I say phases, like having a program where you can quickly potentially develop like 100 megawatt area or a project that is developed in, you can have awarded like first a smaller size of the project and then moving further. Under our perspective from SciTech, it's actually something that would work. I understand that that's not giving scale from the very beginning, but maybe it can help developing the industry in a more smooth way. But maybe.
And Rajneesh, I mean, the largest floating offshore wind project operating, so I guess, can you share some perspectives?
I think floating wind can be a key enabler for energy transition in Australia, and as I said also earlier, become an emerging market. Currently, we have only 197 megawatt deployed offshore, floating offshore wind. Then I'm excluding the single turbine demos, which are global. So there's 4 projects where majority is operated by Equinor. But what we need is scale. That's really, really important. We can't continue with small projects and demos. So as I said, we have the technology. We have proved that it's scalable, going from demo to Hywind Scotland to Hywind Tampen, also develop the technology on the cost reduction also. But we need to ramp up the scale and the volume. We will see that the cost will come down further and be more competitive compared to bottom fixed.
Thank you. Nam?
Thanks, Amisha. I think Australia's in such a lucky position that they do call us the lucky country, in that, look, we didn't have to be the Wright brothers inventing the plane here in Australia. Luckily for us, pioneers in the industry have really forged the floating technology and brought those lessons into the technology of today. I do think that we, similarly, still have only scratched the surface of the technology opportunity, and there's a great deal of opportunity to further optimize floating as technology. I think with your question in regards to promotion, whilst I work as a development manager, I actually don't think it's a sales role for us as industry to need to promote programs for floating offshore wind. But I think the key essence of the question is around spreading that awareness of the opportunity to industry, to the sector, to how does Australia, how does New South Wales transition? And that's, I think, quite about messaging as well as promotion.
Thank you very much. Moving on to industrialisation. Rajneesh, I'm going to come to you first. What's it going to take to deliver at scale, and how do we industrialise?
Again, back to the single word collaboration. As you point out, not only collaboration between developers and supply chain, but collaboration with all stakeholders, developers, supply chain, authorities, government. I know that in the previous panel it was mentioned sector deal, that can help to kind of support investments in the supply chain. And I think industrialization is, which we have seen in some markets on the bottom fix, is really needed and is key. Addition to industrialization, standardization is also important going forward. So collaboration, because we need to act as one industry. It is a little bit too much protectionism still in the offshore wind industry, from my personal point of view. So how can we open up a little bit? It's very competitive, of course, but how can we open up a little bit and act as one industry? And we have the same ambition in the end.
Rajneesh, you've just walked yourself into another question. Before I move on, standardization, and you're heading to South Korea as well, and there's 4 developments in the area of Ulsan, if I'm not mistaken. Any scope for standardization? Can you share any perspectives there?
Internally in Equinor, we are trying to standardize across our global portfolio, whether it's projects floating in the US or whether it's in Europe or in Asia. So we are trying to have a portfolio perspective and trying to standardize. I think that's key to further cost reduction.
Thank you. David, let me come to you next.
Space imports.
Sorry?
Space imports. So ports, we need the ports ready. We've seen, and we've doing a round trip around, let's say, 4 different ports in Australia. We've seen, the ambition of the port of Hastings, the ambition of task ports, the ambition of Newcastle. If we want to go quick and when we want to industrialize and to mass produce, we need those extensions to become a reality. And I think that's, obviously I agree with, let's say, the other bits and pieces on the standardization, let's say, collaboration and so on. But if we have very mature technologies, if we have, let's say, a competitive approach, but don't have the way to deliver them, then we don't have nothing.
And you say sort of progress on ports. Can you give us some insights into how that's progressing in Australia at the moment, some of the conversations and how that's looking to be approached? What would you like to see?
Yeah, it's a bit kind of very related to the way we see kind of the process coming. So we see the feasibility licenses going forward that will eventually get into commercial licenses. But until there is no a CFD, an auction happening, the developers can then, let's say, take a position where they can award contracts, and then I guess Equinor or Skyborn can discuss on that. Then there won't be such investments from the supply chain. So I guess that if the government in Australia wants to further, let's say, accelerate the development of floating offshore wind, then these need to be public investments into the infrastructures, and then having these land leased to the supply chain or the developers themselves.
Thank you. Nam.
Thanks, Amisha. I'd really like to echo that point. I think one way to get certainty, one way to accelerate the opportunity is firm orders. If I have a firm order, I can place a firm order. The supply chain can have security in their investment. The uncertainty can be quite crippling sometimes. So I think that's where we do have an opportunity from a policy perspective to provide a bit more certainty to industry, whether that be through support mechanisms or to proponents with regard to CFDs or the like, but also support mechanisms to ports and port facilities, because I want the ports to upgrade as well, and we have a combination of private ports and public ports in Australia. And now if I'm a port myself, I want that surety to make the investment in the port modification that's required to support this industry, which in turn supports my revenue and my business case as a port. So I think that certainty and an ability to achieve some firm orders is absolutely required, where policy has a role to play. I do want to come back to standardisation as well.
Please
and
do.
As it almost sounds like a boring word, standard, would just be standard. But actually, as we'd all appreciate, standardisation can also equate to efficiency. And I think as a community, as an industry community, we've probably all got a role to play. As a developer, with a developer hat on, I don't want to push supply chain to the wall. I don't want to see supply chain at breaking point. And whilst innovation is great, it doesn't mean innovation at the expense of profitability or sustainability. And personally, I've had the lived experience of working for a wind turbine OEM that we probably embraced innovation too much, and we had too many models. And that was all pushing the business case to reduce the LCOE. So I think there needs to be the right balance, and that comes from both the OEM side, but also from the developer and industry side. And that carries through to vessels. It's not just turbines, it's vessels, it's ports, it's the whole kit and caboodle.
Rajneesh, you want to come in?
Just come to, about the ports and harbors, as you asked about. I think the ports and harbors are even more important for floating wind than bottom fixed because you need a lot of space. You need to assemble the whole turbine, including the floater tower, inshore before you tow it out. So ports and harbors are really, really important. So you need some kind of incentives to be able to upgrade or develop the ports. So personally, I would like to see that Australia adopting a little bit of sector deal, supporting the supply chain, a little bit of the Dutch model where you simplify the permitting, taking good things from the different markets and putting it together. That could be, for me personally, very good model.
Thank you. Just going to shift to some audience questions. Ooh, cost reduction. Now this keeps on coming up. How do we mitigate project risks and achieve cost reduction on floating offshore wind? What does and will Australia need to grapple with? Nam, I'm going to throw that to you first.
Thank you. It's a challenging question. I guess we, on one side of that balance, we want to make the projects optimized. But coming back to the point I made earlier, we don't want to focus purely on cost out to the extent where, okay, we've trimmed the fat, that's great, and then we start trimming into muscle, and then, oh gosh, we're in bone. And that, we can't reduce costs to the extent that it's crippling and not in a sustainable manner. So I think with regard to costs, we need to look at all the opportunities to innovate. And there may be things that we haven't yet discovered today with regard to opportunities to reduce costs through the whole supply chain to produce electrons. There's electrical losses, opportunities in that space, dynamic cables, opportunities in that space. How do we maximize the wind resource? How do we microsite to extract the most yield out of the sites? So I think there's all those opportunities to reduce the cost of the LCOE, not just purely reducing the cost of things, because things cost money.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, so in SciTech, we've been analyzing the cost of floating technology for a while now. And well, we truly think that concrete provides an opportunity for not only cost reduction, but also more certainty towards the developers into the financial modeling. Why I'm saying this? Because the volatility of the prices for steel compared to concrete. I usually say that our demonstration project wouldn't be floating and let's say operational now in Spain if it was actually a steel solution. Because we've run through, we kicked off the project. FID was in February 2020, and we all know what happened in March 2020. We go all over the war and so on. But it's not only about the material, it's also about the fact about local content. And we need to look into what's really local content. Is it local content to have the factory for my platforms in Victoria and then in New South Wales and then in Tasmania? Or can we agree on having a production hub that will serve to the different states in Australia, where I can repay the investment into this production hub, not only in one project, but in 2, 3, or 4. Same for the formworks, or let's say the different heavy lifting equipment, and that goes on and on.
Okay, thank you. Rajneesh, did you want to come in?
I support whatever have been said now by Nam and David, but I can add, bottom fixed offshore wind has spent 40 hours to the levels we are now at LCOE. Someone is saying that it has been raised to bottom in the last few years, but for floating, we don't have to spend so many years to reduce the cost and come to the same levels. We take, again, the learnings. But we need the same pathway as we had for bore and fixed. That's, again, volume, scaling, globalization. To some extent, there has been standardization, but it can be more improved. It has been industrialization, and there has been learning. So we need the same pathway as we had for bore and fixed with scale and volume to further reduce the cost and also learning. But we will not use 40 years to come to the same level on LCOE as we did for bore and fixed. That's the upside. And you also mentioned about the capacity factors, which is an upside for the floating wind. On the revenue side, as you mentioned, the sustainability on the revenue side is also really important in the future.
And for the LCOE, yeah.
Yeah.
Itself, yeah.
I've had another audience question, and fixed and floating. Do we see a future where fixed and floating foundations can be featured in one project?
Yeah, I think so. We are already combining different type of substructure, monopiles with jackets. So why not combine, if we have the right site, the right depths, why not combine also bottom fixed with floating wind?
David?
I'd love to see that. To be honest, and now with the experience we have, just on the vessels, for example, we'll be using pretty different vessels. So the mobilization of the vessels, if you are going to repay that mobilization and demobilization through half a project and not through an entire project and 2 times, because you will need to mobilize a jack-up vessel on one side and then certain anchor handling vessels on the other, that can be sometimes it's about the business case, right? So
it's a business case. Technically, it's viable. It's it's about the cost, as you said, business case. But it is possible. Technically.
Did you want to come in?
Just a soundbite. Look, I think absolutely the floating offshore wind opportunity in Australia needs to progress in parallel with the fixed bottom offshore wind industry in Australia, as developing those industries. For the novel question of would you combine floating and fixed bottom into a single project, I guess coming back to Rajnish's point, it's of course technically possible, but what's the best engineering fit? What's the best engineering solution for a particular opportunity? I wouldn't approach it from just a novel sake. Of course, we can do anything if we spend enough money, but it's got to be the best engineering fit.
Thank you. And we're approaching our last couple of minutes. So I'm just going to place the question on job creation, because I promised that we would come back to that. So I'd really invite all the panelists to share some views and where there are potential advantages in Australia. And then I think if you could leave the audience with one key takeaway and wish that you would like to see to further development in Australia. And Rajnish, I will come to you first.
So it was to me?
Yes.
The key takeaway is, I think we have already touched up on that, but again, I will repeat myself, sorry for that, but clear ambition, supported by policies. And as I said, Australia can be one of the emerging leading markets in APAC when it comes to floating wind, and with a lot of potential value creation and also job creation. And Australia is a very attractive market also on the personal level. Who doesn't want to go to Australia and work? So you can attract a lot of talents while you're kind of developing your own skill set and competency locally.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, a single platform for 15 to 20 megawatt unit would be of the size of a rugby pitch, now that we are here in Australia. some with, let's say, different sizes for sure, but let's have that in mind. And that gives great opportunities and challenges aside, right? There's obviously, if we want to produce one rugby pitch a week, that's huge, and that's powerful in terms of your creation, but that also, we all will recognize that that means great investments and obviously, yeah, collaboration between all the parties. Okay, so I think that's also a visual message, I would say.
Thank you. And lastly, Nam.
Thanks, Amisha. Job creation is a really interesting one because I think it's more of a challenge. How do we resource this opportunity? And with any new industry coming, whether it be offshore wind or, let's create a cheese making factory as an industry, it's going to need the human resources. And that's a challenge that I think Australia will really rise to the occasion. We've got great talent in Australia, and hey, we've done it before. We built the Hunter Valley, all those coal-fired power plants when there was nothing there. We built the Latrobe Valley, or the coal-fired plants there in Victoria when there was nothing there. I'd be embarrassed for my generation, my son's generation, his children's generation, if we couldn't rise up to the challenge of meeting this, and actually would be letting down the people who have blazed the trail before us. So it's an exciting challenge. I think part of that will be the expatriate opportunity to bring learnings in from overseas, and then also organically growing from the resource base that we have here in oil and gas, in our existing renewables sectors, and the other indirect opportunities for job creation as part of that.
Thank you so much. And I'm getting the flashing red light, so that means our time's up. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining me today. And if I could ask the audience to join me in thanking our panelists in the usual way. Thank you so much.